We'll continue with the Bootstrap grid exercise that we started out in the previous exercise. We're going to do a few more things to our index.html page in order to improve its layout. We're going to use some custom CSS classes and add some color to our index.html page using custom CSS classes. The next thing that I'm going to do is go down to the footer, and for this UL here, you notice that this list, when you look at our web page, is displayed in the web page using this bulleted list here. I'm not too happy with this bulleted list. I want to remove these bullet points and then simply show them as only the links there. So to do that, I'm going to use another list style called as list unstyled and apply that to that UL tag there. Going back to your web page, to this UL tag in the footer, I'm going to apply the class as list unstyled, and this would remove those bullets in front of these links there. Now, let me add a few custom CSS classes to the index.html page. To do that, we will now create a folder here and then name it as the CSS folder here. Inside the CSS folder, I'm going to create a new file and then name the file as styles.css. Now, inside the styles.css file, I can now add some CSS classes in order to style our page. Let me add some CSS classes here. So I would add my first class as row header. So as the name implies, this class I am applying to the header, and then I would apply the margin as 0 pixel auto, and then padding as 0 pixel auto. So this is for the row header. So I'm going to have 0 margin and 0 padding for the row header. And then for the row content, so I'm going to add one more CSS class called row content. And then for this, I would add margin 0 pixel auto, and then padding I would add 50 pixel, 0 pixel, 50 and 0 pixel. Then I'm going to add a border at the bottom of my row here, and then the border I will give it 1 pixel and then call it a ridge, and I will set the minimum height to be 400 pixel for the content here. Now that way my web page will look a lot more nicer on the screen. Now this again, you have to try and see until you're satisfied with the way the page is laid out. Now also, I'm going to include one more class called as the footer, which, as you might have already guessed, I'm going to apply to the footer, and I will apply a background color to the footer as D1C4E9. If you ask me how I selected the color, I just looked up the color and then I was happy with that color. You can choose any color you want to apply, but this color seems to be good for me, so I added that color. And for the padding for the footer, I would add 20 pixel and 0 pixel. Now, once I have added these styles to my CSS file. Let me apply the CSS file to the index.html page. Now, going to the index.html page, obviously I need to use that CSS file inside my index.html page. So right after the Bootstrap CSS file, I'm going to do a link and style sheet, and this is styles.css file there. So that is where my CSS file is stored. So I'm going to include that into my index.html page. Now I am going to go into the body and then apply the classes that I have just created. So going to the header, I will apply the row header class to the div in the header. Then for the content, I would apply the row content classes to the rows there. So to the 3 rows in the content, I apply the row content class, and then going down to the footer tag, I will apply the class footer here, and then save the changes. Let's go and have a look at the web page now. Going to your web page, we are already beginning to see some interesting changes to the web page. So you can now see that the content in the web page has been laid out a bit more cleaner. That is the border bottom that we added to the row content. So you can see that there is enough separation between the rows, although the contents of the rows are still positioned towards the top in the rows. So you have these 3 rows, and then look at the footer. The footer now has acquired the background color that I applied, and notice how the links are styled with the list unstyled on the left side here. We are not done yet. We're going to do a few more changes to the index.html page and then come back and have a look at the final result of this exercise. Going back to our editor, I'm going to add a few more CSS classes into my styles.css file. So I'm going to go in there and then add a class called Jumbotron. So you see that we have already applied the Jumbotron to our header there. Now if I add more properties to this Jumbotron class here, this will be applied to that Jumbotron in addition to the standard default Jumbotron that Bootstrap already includes. So I'm going to add in a few more things. So I'm going to add in a padding of 70 and 30 pixel on its surroundings, and then a margin of 0 pixel all around, and I will set the background of this to 9575 CD. This is a somewhat of a darker purple color, which seems to go very well on the Jumbotron. Again, by trial and error, I selected that color, and also the text color as floral white. So for the Jumbotron, we're going to apply those classes, and also I'm going to apply one more class to the address class. We have an address in the footer, so I'm going to change the font size of that to 80%, a slightly smaller font than the normal font, and the margin I will give it a 0 pixel, and the color I'm going to use 0F, 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 and then save the changes. So a couple more CSS classes added. Switching back to index.html, what I'm going to do now is to go to the content rows, and then I'm going to try and position this content in the middle vertically in that row. This is where I'm going to take the help of the vertical alignment that Bootstrap Grid supports through the Flexbox support. So to do that, I would say align items center. So this is the other class that I need to add, align items center. And I'm going to add that to the remaining two rows also. Align items center to the second and the third row. And that should do a vertical justification of the content of the rows. We'll see the result in a minute. Going down to the footer, in the footer, you see that we have used the column auto for this copyright content there. Now I'm going to position this right in the middle horizontally using the justify content center class there. So there is a justify content and a few other classes there. I'm going to use the justify content center class for that. That will essentially position that column in the center of the row there. So that applied to that. And then one little change that I'm going to do is to this inner div there, I'm going to apply a class as text center to that, so that these links are centered on the screen. With these changes, let's go and take a look at the web page at the end of this exercise. Going to our web page is already starting to look even better now. So you can now see that the Jumbotron is now styled with a new background color, which is a little darker purple there, and the lettering is now in floral white color, a little bit indented there. Then you can now see that the content in the content rows are now vertically centered for the three content rows. So this is the use of the align items center that we applied to the rows there. Then going to the footer, you can now see that this copyright is now justified to the center of the screen. Look at how the links here have been centered. I realize that I want to also position this vertically centering to this particular row. So let's go and apply one more class to move this to the center of this particular row vertically. So to do that, going back to index.html, in the footer, for that particular column which contains those, I will apply the class as align self center. So this should be applied to the div which uses the column classes. With this, that particular content will be aligned to the center of the row. The remaining content will still remain at the top. Let's take a final look at the footer. Going to the footer in our web page, you can now see how this has been positioned vertically at the center. These two pieces of content are still aligned to the top of the row. That is fine because that looks okay in there, but this one I have dragged it down vertically to the center of this particular row. With this, we complete this exercise. In this exercise, we saw the use of custom CSS classes and also used some of the classes for justifying the content horizontally and vertically in our rows. This is a good time for you to do a git commit with the message Bootstrap Grid Part 2.